Explain the markets exactly, because although they are down not nearly as much as what the economic numbers might indicate.
David, this week the markets were all over the place, as you said. And what is really interesting is that people are comparing this week a little bit like to settling down post this being sort of 6th week of the shutdown, and comparing it to sort of after the war, or after, sort of post-COVID will be after a wartime economy, or post-2008. And I think we are in a very, very different situation. We are in a situation where you have a lot of zombie companies in the mutual funds and ETFs that are getting carried through with the good companies. And at the same time, you have a lot of companies that do have strong financials. And I think for investors, there is a big move towards getting into higher quality companies with better financials. And last but not least, what was really interesting this week and last week was that companies that have a higher ESG rating, both in US and Europe, did relatively better.
So, Afsaneh, is that all right? You're responsible for putting money to work. Does that mean this is maybe the resurgence of active investing? Do you have to actually pick the stocks now instead of the ETFs?
I think no question that you do need to look much more at active investing. I don't want to say that it's time to short the index funds and the big passive providers, but at the same time, you have to be in companies that are going to do well, and they might be larger companies, but also a lot of smaller companies that are benefiting from the conversion of technology and finance and technology and education and technology and medicine. So we are looking at both ends of the larger and the smaller companies that are innovative, that are responding to what is needed, and also the companies that are behaving better to all their stakeholders seem to be the kinds of companies that you want to be invested with in the longer run.
Afsaneh, when we talk about a wild week, that certainly was the case for oil, where we actually saw WTI futures trade in the negative, well into the negative, actually. You've spent a fair amount of time in the energy sector in your career. Could you give us a sense of what's going on there? Is this a longer-term trend?
No question, David, that this is a long-term trend in terms of demand has been going down as energy efficiency has been improving. And even before we had the COVID virus shutting down all economies globally, you had this sort of trend going on. If you look at what is, I think, very interesting this week, of course, is with the futures market. And every retail investor and Gen Z who was invested in the retail futures market through the USO or other kinds of funds so got to learn in the hard way how oil markets work. So I think Contango became a household word. But in terms of energy markets, I think longer term, if we put aside the problems with oil storage, which are filled now to the brim, and even on the oceans, the tankers are full. If you put that aside and the fact that demand is not coming back so fast, looking longer term, I think what has been really interesting is if you look at the behavior of oil consumers and oil producers. If you looked at 2014 versus 2016, you did have a phenomenon where oil prices went down from about $100 to about $45. And that was a huge shock to oil producers and oil exporters in particular. And what you saw is that they cut down on their spending, and they also had to go into their sovereign wealth funds or their FX and spend a lot. This time round, I think you will see that in even bigger doses. And one of the interesting events this last week was that in Russia, where the foreign reserves were supposed to last about 8 years, what they're saying now is that this year only, in 2020, they'll have to use close to half of their reserves. And maybe by the end of 2021, they'll be finished with their reserves. So that's a lot of change to oil producers and oil consumers. And I think one big boom as we come out of the COVID-19 pandemic is that finally the impact of lower oil prices will help the consuming countries, and their economy will grow a little faster because of cheaper oil.